everyone. Welcome to our AI Pulse session today. My name is Nathan. I'm from Core. I'll be your moderator. And I'm joined here by Murali. He's an AI industry expert with over 2.5 decades of experience creating real-world solutions for enterprise challenges. And today, what we're really going to talk about is how to future-proof agentic AI for your company and tame the risk of AI agent sprawl. So we'll start with talking about our vision for where we see the future of AI agent ecosystems going. Murali's going to walk through what agent sprawl is and its risks for the enterprise. We're going to introduce some best practices around centralized governance and talk about next steps for AI leaders. So first, let's start with where we see the world heading, especially in enterprise AI. So as companies adopt more and more AI agents, or basically digital employees to help them alongside their different business functions, they start to use AI in vastly different ways. For example, in finance, they may use AI agents for reporting and financial planning and analysis. In R&D, they may use it for research and generating ideas and accelerating innovation. And in technical support, they may use AI to personalize conversations and resolve tickets faster. But this leads to a huge mismatch in how AI is used across the organization. And this trend is compounded. Gartner said a third of enterprise applications will include agentic AI from 2028, up from less than 1% in 2024. So this technology and its adoption is growing exponentially. And that leads to a very unique problem at companies that we call agent sprawl. And I'll hand it over to Murali to talk about what agent sprawl is and its risks for your company.
Thanks, Nathan. And I think the point you bring up about agent sprawl is pretty real. What we've seen in the enterprises is over the last few years, people have started to experiment with the LLMs and the models around in terms of optimizing various different parts of business operations. Now, when the LLMs came in, it was pretty much trying to use the models with the tools like ChatGPT and Claude, trying to do things like summarization. But eventually, there were frameworks built around that. Things like LangChain, things like Kore.ai, AutoGen, many frameworks that have come around in the recent past. And people have started to use these frameworks along with the model to start experimenting and optimizing the different parts of the organization. Now, these experiments are good. Majority of them have not seen production, and they've been all in terms of testing to see what works and what doesn't. But some of them have started to creep into production right now. And the challenge has been, as enterprises have started to see that there is value in this, and now they have to start thinking about this more as a part of the enterprise, and more of the part of the production of the enterprise, whether it's employee-facing activities or customer-facing activities. They are seeing a bunch of different experiments done with various different technical stacks across the organization. Each one of them being a favorite of a particular team, trying to do what they can. And then you suddenly see these ones creeping into production. And they've started to realize that over a long period of time, this will become a significant amount of challenge. Because when you start thinking about agents, what you're starting to look at is you're going to have an army of agents trying to do various different activities. And when you start thinking about an army of agents, then you would have plenty of these small active agents trying to do things like, for example, document extraction, intent classification, probably a summarization, invoice extraction, so on and so forth, in different parts of the organization. And you will see each of the part of the organization trying to create their own, and suddenly you have a plethora of agents out there. The question really comes in to say, well, what does this mean to the enterprise? And I guess the enterprise have already started to look at this and say, well, if we let this go unchecked, we're going to see a lot of risk coming within the organization. And we have to start planning for those risks right now. And how do we ensure that we mitigate them before they actually happen? You go to the next slide. So broadly, we see three different types of risk. One is obviously inefficiency in the operations itself. Now, if you start creating these and if you're enabling certain kind of productivity benefits from those in specific parts of the organization, that's brilliant. But you have to, at some point in time, start looking at this holistically and say, how do I actually ensure something that's built in one part of the organization is actually used in the other part of the organization without having to duplicate that? And most importantly, the frameworks being used, the models being used, and the governance structure that sits on top of it. All of this is taken care of. If not, instead of it actually enabling efficiency, which may temporarily do, overall there will be inefficiencies because you have to work with your regulations, you have to work with your governance structure of an organization. And this is, if this sprawl happens, it'll be very difficult for the enterprises to kind of bring all of these pieces together and figure out exactly what they're doing, especially with the models being able to having the probabilistic nature and unsure what they're really doing behind the scenes. The second risk that we see is the compliance, which I just touched upon right now. Because the moment you start going into regulated industries, whether it's healthcare, finance, so on and so forth, they have a bunch of regulations that they have complied. When you're experimenting with these models internally, if it's not impacting anything you do towards your customer, that's brilliant. It can stay as experiments. The moment you start exposing them into production capabilities, whether it's interactions with your customer or interactions with your employees too, because employees using information that these models and agents provide and them combining that to send it out to the customers eventually may start breaching securities and compliance that you may have. And it is important for you to kind of take a look at what these compliance and risks could be well in advance. Start planning those to make sure that you don't let these agents go unchecked and have a complete control. And most importantly, traceability of exactly what happened when you have to go back and really check on to things that went wrong. And so security and compliance risk is some other risk that we see with this sprawl of agents across the organization. The third one is, again, we've seen this multiple times historically as well. When you see these small experiments happen, because there is a new technology comes in, people are very fascinated about the technology and they jump deep dive into it. And now they believe they have a new power, a magic wand, if you want to look at it that way, that enables you to take a particular problem that they were struggling to fix earlier, and they are now able to do that by just waving the wand. That gives them a lot of power. But that power, unfortunately, is extremely good in terms of experimentation, but becomes very, very critical and difficult for you to actually take it from a business perspective when you have to really push it into production. Now, as an organization, you have a certain principles that you want to adhere to. You have a certain amount of objectives that you're set forward to, and ensuring that all the agents you build within your organization are somehow aligned to your business goals, whether it is your enterprise business goals, whether your departmental business goals, or whether your project business goals. And you have to ensure that any policies and compliance around that is actually embedded into the agent, including your structure of documentation, your knowledge, so on and so forth. And they work around those constraints and the boundary lines that you've defined and not go and breach them. So we see that this, while may look very, very simple right now, as more teams start experimenting with it, and we see this becoming a norm very soon, you have to start looking at this as an approach for managing these risks before you start using the agents that you're building within an organization full time into production. And most importantly, letting them run autonomously. Now, this is not new. I mean, I'm sure if you guys, any organization we've spoken to, any of the customers we've spoken to, we already see that there are plenty of agents being deployed. Now, majority of them may not see full-time production. They may be still in experimental phase, and they may be dropped out. They may be merged into another one. But the point is that we see different parts of the organization being focused on building these agents, trying to optimize whatever they're trying to do. And we see this not only from our experience, but also from the research we've been doing, and research the likes of the McKinsey and EY and folks have been doing as well. And they concur that most of the organizations that have started to experiment with AI because they feel that this is a new power they have, which can enable them to change the way the entire organization works. Because one of the things we see is in the new organization, you will have a combination of human employees and AI employees kind of working together. If you go back to the chart that Nathan saw, you will see that the hierarchy itself is going to change, and there's going to be a combination of and human employees and AI employees coming together, which means that you will have plenty of these agents being built, and that is based on our experience, our interview of what we have done, our conversations with our customers, and also based on the research. And this is just getting started. And we're going to see a significant amount of this number increase pretty much in every part of the organization. The larger the organization, the larger these numbers are going to be, and more stronger your focus has to be in terms of optimizing these risks. Now, how do we start thinking about control? There are a few areas that we have to start looking at. First is you cannot stop experimentation happening from across the organization because that's the bread and butter of how you innovate. You do want to let that happen and you do want them to use the frameworks that they're thinking about. Obviously, if there is a way to bring those standardizations, that's brilliant. But the standardization trying to be enforced on based on how things are changing today probably is not the right idea too. Because today you have a framework that you think is working perfectly. A week from now, you have a brand new framework that actually changes the game. And we've been seeing that over the last couple of years that every week, every month, there is a new idea, there is a new model, and there is a new framework that's coming in. So with that in mind, you do not want to enforce a particular way of doing stuff, but you do want to enforce a way of how all of these stuff that's being done can coexist together. And that's the primary piece. I think it's important for us to be able to ensure that wherever you build the agents, however they are built, they can come coexist and eventually you have one central governance that can enable you to take a look at each of these agents. Obviously, if they are black box agents that's been built by some external entity, it's a different challenge. You do want to ensure that that actually comes and sits within your boundary. But if an agent built on different frameworks, and if you want to ensure that each of them work together, there is a super orchestrator that actually manages agents, irrespective of the frameworks they're built in, the models they use, the cloud they are hosted in. You need to be able to bring them and make sure they talk to each other. And most importantly, have a single governance control plane that can sit on top of it. Now, this is extremely important. And you have to, whether you think about this as a central governance tenant or ensure that you have a central governance capability that a team manages, that your particular group managers, your department managers, your project managers, is a call you have to take depending on what complexity it is and where you are as an organization. But it is important, though, that you have to have the understanding of what each of these agents do, how they execute, what are they doing, and getting all of this piece of information available so that the central governance is possible. So we think about central governance solution as three key elements, really. One is centralizing the lifestyle management itself. This is essentially about how do you onboard different agents? How do you build different agents? How do you configure them, update them, and eventually retire them? The way you think about this is the same philosophy as we think about human employees. There is a full life cycle you go through them. You kind of hire them, you onboard them, you work with them, you kind of give them the ratings and configurations to make sure that they perform better. And eventually, at some point of time, they decide to move out of the organization. And so you kind of retire them and you have a replacement for that. Agents follow a similar kind of a life cycle as well. And the difference is you're not really going and looking for hiring them. You have a bunch of different marketplaces you can go. That's where you would hire them. You actually bring these agents, whether it is homegrown agents, home built agents, or external agents. You bring them on, and then you need to configure them because once the agent comes in, just like the way you would hire an employee from external services, when they come into your organization, you're trying to ensure that they understand the context of your organization. They may have an understanding of how that particular activity can work, but it's important for them to understand what systems you use, what kind of governance structure you have, what kind of knowledge you have, and agents go through a very similar path. So you have to configure them, providing them the knowledge and the context of your organization. And more importantly, you can start thinking about how they should, what are the boundary lines you want them to behave within. So you do that. And then you start thinking about how they're working. Over a period of time, you monitor their performance. You see if they're actually working as they're supposed to. You build thresholds and you ensure that they're actually working on those thresholds. And if they stop performing, then you have to start thinking about, do you have to update an agent or bring in a completely new different thing? And that's where the next operational insight and measurable ROI really comes into play. Because again, once you have these agents performing, then you have to start looking at what that performance looks like. And this, unlike working with human employees, you're not looking at a quarter-based or a yearly-based performance. You're looking at every run-based performance. You're looking at how things happen over a period of time. Because initially, though, they may not be doing the job they're supposed to because you've configured them with the knowledge. Maybe they're not up to all the information they're supposed to have. But over a period of time, you tame them with optimizing the prompts, optimizing the kind of context you provide, the knowledge you provide, and eventually they start performing to your liking. But the thing about the agents is, as the model changes, agent performance may either degrade or upgrade. So you have to constantly keep evaluating what's happening. And one of the philosophies that we think about internally within Core is we think about this as evaluation driven development. So evaluation is a critical part of what we do. And it is important that as you start building these agents and putting them into production, you continuously evaluate them, seeing how they are performing over the objectives you've set forward. And if they degrade from those objectives or from the performance, then you start thinking about what you need to do to improve the agent capability. Finally, organizations have policies and guardrails. And now policies could be depending on what you're working on within your organization. Let's say, for example, if you're insurance, you may have policies in terms of how to manage claims. Certain threshold of claims, you can do an auto payment, certain threshold of claims, you have to go through an investigation. Similarly, within a financial industry, you may think about KYC and how do you actually onboard customers. KYC with general people is a different story, and KYC with probably what they call PEP, politically exposed people, is a different story. So each one of them have kind of different policies at play, and you have to start thinking about how do you put these policies within the your organization governance and make sure the agents actually adhere to the policies. When they breach a policy, you get notified on what's happening, and then you work on top of it. So broadly, we believe that these are the three governance solutions that you have to think about. So how do you go about implementing this? There are broad 6 to 7 steps that we think are important at a very high level. And obviously, you have to think about what makes sense for your organization and kind of customize this. But first, fundamentally, you have to understand and be realistic where you are in your AI journey. And we know everybody is trying to run at the top speed possible today. And you have to figure out where you are, kind of put that as a baseline, and ensure while you're doing the experimentation, you also think about where you want to be. And once that's done, as a second step, you have to start thinking about how do you ensure there is a cross-functional governance board. Every department and every group and every project is very, very keen on getting their hands on this AI capabilities and the agentic capabilities and building something very quick. However, the proliferation of these agents and ensuring that you don't have to build the same thing twice, and most importantly, whenever they are applied, they not only follow the governance and the policies and the structures around that particular organization, but that particular unit, but as a broader organization capability as well, is very, very critical. So it is important that you start with this functional governance board as a very, very simple team that actually goes and sits and takes a look at what's happening and provides some kind of a playbook for them to work with, some kind of governance structure for them to work with, and also, if possible, the frameworks and the models that they want to work with, and eventually expand on this depending on the experiences each of the teams have. The third is the policies and standards and best practices. Obviously, there are two types of policies. One is your organizational operational policies. Those are probably written in stone and driven by the governance and the regulations around you. However, you do want to have the policies and the standards for implementing these agents themselves. How do you think about them right from ideation, brainstorming, thinking about which problem to solve, how to solve them, which models to use, what is the capabilities of those models, the cost associated with that, how do you think about agentic? Do you want to give it fully autonomous capability? Do you want to have deterministic capability? Do you want to be somewhere in between? All of these are something that you want to kind of structure as a playbook and provide that as a guidance to different teams. Now, this is not a one-time thing. This is a back and forth because things are moving very, very quickly. You will have some standards today, but some team learns something different and they kind of contribute back to these policies. And you have to make this more of a living document that can evolve over a period of time based on the experiments various different teams do as well. Then you have to, most importantly, think about choosing a platform that enables you to kind of accelerate faster. The platform should only let you focus on what matters the most for you, which is about finding problems, experimenting with them, and quickly seeing what works best. And not worry about things that are something the platform should generally take care of. So, for example, if you're experimenting with something, you're good, you know that works, you've tested with many, many different business users. Now, how do you scale from 1% to 1,000 people, to 10,000 people, to 100,000 people? That's something the platform you choose should be taking care of automatically. You should be more free to focus on the innovation part of it, the creative aspect of it, and everything that's repeatable and everything that is scalable, which the platform can do, should be done by the platform. So think about that before you choose a platform. Over a period of time, obviously, piloting, iterating. I mean, this is happening in pretty much every organization right now, but you do want to provide, again, boundary lines and structures around that. Every pilot, every iteration you do should somehow give you input back. What did they learn? What did they understand from the experiment? And how can you change your playbooks from that? How can you change the way you want to interact with various different models? Do you want to use standard models available in the market? Do you want to start building small language models on top of it? So these are the different kind of learnings that every team will have. What's happening today is all of these learnings are left alone with those particular individual teams and not bubbled up into general organization learning. And that's what you would probably want to do with pilot and iteration, and obviously expand with what you're doing right now. And on top of that, finally, the governance and process optimization thing that we talked about. At the end of the day, every time you try to bring in some kind of an automation, this is because either you're improving the top line or optimizing the bottom line. So you have to think about where this is contributing towards, and then figure out the governance and the optimization you're trying to do, and figure out which part of your entire life cycle of your value chain of an organization this can play a role. I mean, obviously, we know that every part of the value chain is open for innovation right now with AI. But you have to start thinking about where the most value for you is and start from there and bubble up across your value chain. And finally, all of this comes down to how do you look at what's happening with each of these agents? You have to have full deep down traceability, both from an internal checkpoint and seeing how things are working, and also from regulations perspective. If somebody comes and asks about a particular execution of a conversation with a customer, you should be able to go deep dive into every step the agent took, why it took, what kind of thinking it went through, what model did it use, what kind of input prompt it actually gave in, what context went in, how did it actually make a decision about that particular output it actually gave it. So you have to have a full control of all of these and various different metrics related to your ROI, your policy management, your policy, everywhere your policy was appropriately used and everywhere your policy was not used and where it failed to use the policy, etc. So this entire aspect of what we call the control plane and the governance is very, very important as and when you start moving completely into production of these agentic apps, especially when you start moving from completely deterministic to semi-autonomous and autonomous capability. So that's probably what we had. Thanks so much for your time, and looking forward to our next session.
Thank you, Murali. Take care, everyone.